She stood in a room that smelled of rubbing alcohol and pine sawdust, wearing a wedding dress that had belonged to her mother. But there were no church bells ringing in the valley today. There was no smiling groom waiting at the altar. Instead, Clara O'Malley was staring at a man lying still as a stone, his chest barely rising beneath a heavy wool quilt. They told her she had to marry this stranger, a man in a deep coma, to save her family from ruin. They said it was just a business arrangement, a cold contract signed in ink and desperation. But when the judge told her to kiss the groom, something happened. One touch, one breath, and a spark flew in the darkness that would change the destiny of the entire frontier. Howdy, folks. Welcome back to Frontier Rescue Stories. Before we saddle up and ride into this tale of heartache, redemption, and a love that defied the odds, I need a small favor. If you love these stories from the Old West, go ahead and lasso that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a wagon train. It helps us reach more folks and keep the campfire burning. Also, drop a comment down below. I want to know which part of the world you're tuning in from today. Now let's head back to the Montana Territory, 1885. The year was 1885, deep in the heart of the Bitterroot Valley. It was a place where the mountains scraped the sky and the winters could freeze a man's breath before it left his lips. For the O'Malley family, timber was life. For 3 generations, they had run the sawmill down by the winding Snake River, providing the lumber that built the towns, the saloons, and the bridges of the territory. But in this unforgiving land, one mistake can cost you everything. It wasn't a mistake born of malice, but of nature's cruelty. A harsh spring thaw had soaked the O'Malley timber yard, and a shipment of beams, sent to the Sterling Ranch, the biggest outfit in the county, had been compromised. The wood looked solid on the outside, but inside, rot had taken hold. When the Sterling crew used those beams to raise a new barn, the structure collapsed. It was a tragedy that shook the valley. 12 men were injured, but the worst off was Caleb Sterling. Caleb was the heir to the Sterling cattle empire, a man known for breaking wild stallions and tracking elk through blizzards. He had been right under the main beam when it snapped. He survived the crush, but a severe blow to the head, combined with the dust and shock, had sent him into a deep, unshakable slumber. The doctors called it a coma. The mountain folk just said his spirit had gone wandering. Clara O'Malley, a woman of 26 with hands calloused from work and eyes the color of river moss, watched her father crumble under the weight of the lawsuit. The Sterlings were powerful. They could take the mill, the land, and the very cabin the O'Malleys slept in. It was the end of the line. That was until Beatrice Sterling, the iron-willed matriarch of the ranch, rode up to the O'Malley porch. She didn't come with a sheriff or a judge. She came with a proposition. Beatrice sat at Clara's kitchen table, her gloved hands folded over a piece of parchment. She explained that her late husband's will had a peculiar clause for Caleb to inherit the full estate and keep it out of the hands of greedy land speculators from the east. He had to be married by his 32nd birthday. That birthday was weeks away, and Caleb was lying silent in the makeshift medical wing of the ranch house. "I won't destroy your family, Clara," Beatrice had said, her voice stern but her eyes tired. "I will drop the lawsuit. I will even fund the repairs to your mill. But in exchange, you must marry my son. If he wakes and he wants to dissolve the union, we will do so honorably. If he never wakes, you will be a widow, but a wealthy one, and your family will be safe." Clara had asked for 3 days to think. She spent them walking the riverbank, praying for a sign. She wanted love. She wanted a courtship with flowers and dances at the town hall. But looking at her father's gray, worried face, she knew duty weighed heavier than dreams. She agreed. The wedding day was stripped of all joy. It took place in the Sterling Ranch's infirmary. The room was clean but smelled of sickness. Beatrice had tried to soften the blow by placing jars of wildflowers on the bedside tables, but nothing could hide the reality. Clara stood there in her simple white dress, clutching a bouquet of mountain laurel so tight her knuckles turned white. Judge Miller, an old circuit rider who had married half the county, looked solemn. "Do you, Clara O'Malley, take Caleb Sterling to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara looked at the man in the bed. Even in his stillness, he was striking. He had a strong jaw covered in a few days of dark stubble, and his hands, resting on the quilt, were large and scarred from honest work. He didn't look like a stranger. He looked like the land itself, rough, silent, and enduring. "I do," she whispered. The judge turned to the bed. and since Caleb cannot speak, his mother stands as his proxy. Does Caleb take this woman? He does, Beatrice said, a single tear tracking through the dust on her cheek. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife, the judge sighed. You may seal the union. This was the moment Clara had dreaded. To kiss a man who couldn't kiss back. She leaned over him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She hesitated, watching his chest rise and fall in a slow, shallow rhythm. Closing her eyes, she pressed her lips to his. It was meant to be quick, a formality. But as her lips touched his, something strange happened. It wasn't cold. It was warm, shockingly so. For a fleeting second, Clara felt a jolt, like static electricity before a summer storm. A sudden, unexplained certainty washed over her. A feeling that he was there, trapped behind a wall but present. The monitor by the bed, a primitive device the city doctor had brought, gave a sudden sharp tick before settling back into its rhythm. Clara pulled back, breathless. The nurse checked the pulse, shrugged, and said it was just a muscle spasm. But Clara touched her own lips, her eyes locked on Caleb's still face. It didn't feel like a contract anymore. It felt like a promise made in the dark, waiting for the dawn. After the ceremony, Clara didn't go back to her parents' home. She was a Sterling now, mistress of a ranch she barely knew, wife to a husband who couldn't speak. Beatrice moved her into the main house, giving her the guest room adjacent to Caleb's quarters. The house was a masterpiece of frontier architecture, huge timber beams, stone fireplaces large enough to roast a steer, and wide porches that looked out over the vast grazing lands. But it was a house holding its breath. The servants moved quietly. The ranch hands spoke in hushed tones when they came near the porch. Clara felt like a ghost haunting the halls. To keep herself sane, and perhaps to understand the man she had married, she began to explore. She spent hours in Caleb's study. It was here that the true man began to reveal himself to her. She expected to find ledgers of cattle sales and grain receipts, and she did, but she also found shelves lined with books, Shakespeare, Emerson manuals on hydraulic engineering, and journals on veterinary medicine. One afternoon, she found a drafting table in the corner covered in a canvas sheet. Pulling it back, she revealed detailed blueprints. They weren't for barns or corrals. They were designs for a community schoolhouse and a bridge designed to withstand the spring floods that plagued the poorer families down in the valley. The drawings were meticulous, showing a mind that cared deeply about the safety and well-being of his neighbors. He always wanted to build things that lasted, Beatrice told her one evening, finding Clara tracing the lines of the bridge. He has a rough exterior, my Caleb, but he has the heart of a poet hidden under that duster. Clara felt a pang of guilt. She had judged him as just another rich cattle baron. That night, she made a decision. She wouldn't just sit by his bedside and weep. She would get to know him. The next morning, she brought a chair and sat right next to his head. She opened one of his favorite books of poetry. "Morning, Caleb," she said, feeling foolish at first. The room was silent except for the wind whistling through the chinking of the logs. "I'm Clara, your wife. It's a bit of a long story how we got here, but I figured you might like some company." She began to read. Her voice was shaky at first, but soon it found a rhythm. She read him sonnets. She read him the local newspaper. She told him about the weather. "The snow is melting on the peaks, Caleb," she told him a week later. "The river is running high and brown. Your foreman, Big Jim, says the herd is looking healthy, but he misses your eye for the calves." It became a ritual, every morning after her chores, which now included helping. Beatrice managed the ranch's accounts. Clara would sit with Caleb. She told him about her childhood at the mill, about the smell of fresh cedar, about her father's stubborn pride. She confessed her fears, her dreams of traveling to San Francisco one day, her love for the smell of rain on sagebrush. One afternoon, while dusting his bookshelf, a small bundle of letters fell out from behind a row of encyclopedias. They were tied with a silk ribbon. Curiosity got the better of her. The letters were from a woman named Isabella Vance. The dates were from 3 years ago. Clara read one and her heart sank. Isabella wrote of city lights, of opera houses in St. Louis, and she begged Caleb to leave the dirty, backward ranch and join her in civilization. She spoke of a love that was passionate but demanding. "Who is Isabella?" Clara asked Beatrice later that night over a supper of stew and cornbread. Beatrice's face hardened. She was a mistake, a city girl who thought a cowboy was a novelty toy. She broke his heart. Clara. She wanted him to be something he wasn't. When she left, Caleb closed a part of himself off. He hasn't looked at another woman since. Clara felt a sting of something sharp in her chest. Jealousy. It seemed absurd to be jealous of a past love when her husband was in a coma. But reading those letters, seeing how Caleb had kept them, made her wonder if his heart was still occupied by the ghost of Isabella. That night she sat by his bed looking at his peaceful face. "You deserve better than someone who wants to change you, Caleb," she whispered, brushing a lock of dark hair from his forehead. "You deserve someone who loves the dust and the pine and the way you draw bridges to help folks." She leaned in close. "I don't know if you can hear me, but if you can, don't give up. Not for her. Come back for yourself. Come back because the world needs men who build bridges." She didn't see it, but as she turned to blow out the lamp, the fingers of Caleb's left hand twitched against the sheet. Deep in the well of his unconsciousness, a voice was cutting through the fog. It wasn't the shrill, demanding voice of his past. It was a voice like a mountain stream, clear, steady, and healing. And for the first time in months, Caleb Sterling decided to listen. Winter gave way to the pale green shoots of spring. The valley was waking up, and unknown to everyone. So was Caleb, for months. He had been floating in a gray, formless void. Time had no meaning there. Sometimes he heard harsh, metallic sounds that hurt his mind. Other times there was nothing but silence. But then a tether appeared, a voice. At first it was just a hum, a vibration that brought warmth to the cold void. Then words began to take shape. He learned about a woman named Clara. He learned she was funny, that she had a temper when the ledgers didn't balance, and that she loved the land as much as he did. He heard her reading poetry. He heard her defending his architectural drawings to the foreman who thought they were a waste of time. He heard her sweeping the floor and humming a tune his grandmother used to sing. He began to wait for that voice. It was his lighthouse. He realized with a shock one day, or what felt like a day, that she had called herself his wife. Married. The concept was blurry. He remembered the accident, the cracking of timber, the pain. And now he was married to the owner of this voice. He should have been angry. He should have felt trapped. But instead he felt safe. One rainy Tuesday, Clara was sitting beside him, mending a tear in one of his work shirts. The rain hammered against the roof, a cozy drumming sound. "I feel like a fraud sometimes, Caleb," she said softly, not looking up from her needlework. "Everyone calls me Mrs. Sterling. I sign the checks. I sleep in your house, but I don't know the color of your eyes when you laugh. I don't know if you take your coffee black or with cream." She paused, biting the thread. I think I'm falling in love with a man who might never wake up. And that makes me the biggest fool in Montana." She stood up and walked to the window, watching the rain wash over the valley. "But I promise you this. As long as I'm here, you won't be alone. I'll be your voice until you find yours again." She walked back to the bed and placed her hand over his. "Please, Caleb, just come back." Caleb felt the warmth of her hand. It was an anchor. He focused everything, every ounce of will, every scrap of strength he had left, on that point of contact. He screamed in his mind, commanding his muscles to obey. "Move, just move." Clara felt a squeeze. She froze. She stared at her hand, engulfed by his larger one. "Caleb." His fingers tightened again, a weak, trembling grip, but undeniable. "Doc, Beatrice!" Clara screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. She looked at his face. Beneath the eyelids there was movement. The lashes fluttered. It was a struggle, like a man trying to lift a heavy boulder off his chest. Slowly, agonizingly, his eyes opened. They were brown, a deep, rich hue like polished mahogany, clouded with confusion but undeniably alive. They darted around the room, unfocused at first, before locking onto Clara's face. Clara clapped a hand over her mouth, tears instantly spilling over. "Oh, dear God, you're awake." Caleb's throat was dry as parchment. He tried to speak, but only a raspy croak came out. He swallowed, blinked, and tried again. "Who?" he rasped. "I'm Clara," she sobbed, laughing and crying at the same time. I'm your wife." He stared at her for a long moment. The woman from the void, the voice. She was beautiful, not in a painted-up city way, but in a real way. Her hair was messy, her eyes red with tears. "Clara," he whispered. The name felt right on his tongue. The door burst open. Beatrice and the ranch doctor rushed in. The room descended into chaos, pulses being checked, lights being shown in eyes. joyous sobbing from his mother. Clara stepped back, suddenly feeling like an intruder in this family reunion. She wiped her eyes and moved toward the door, giving them space. "Wait," a voice croaked, stronger this time. Everyone froze. Caleb was trying to sit up, his arms shaking as he reached out, not for his mother, not for the doctor, but past them. "Where are you going?" he asked, his eyes fixed on Clara. I wanted to give you room," she stammered. "Don't," Caleb said. He took a ragged breath. You said you'd be my voice." Beatrice looked from her son to Clara, a look of dawning realization and pure joy on her face. Clara stepped back to the bedside. Caleb's hand found hers again. "I heard you," he whispered, so low only she could hear. "The poetry, the bridge designs, the rain, I heard it all." Clara squeezed his hand, her heart soaring higher than the peaks outside. "You heard the part about me being a fool?" A faint, tired smile touched the corner of his lips. "Best fool in Montana," he murmured, before exhaustion pulled him back into a natural, healing sleep. The recovery was not a fairy tale. It was a grueling, sweaty, frustrating battle. Caleb Sterling was a man used to breaking horses and hauling timber. Now he had to relearn how to hold a spoon without shaking. His muscles had atrophied and his temper was short. But Clara was his rock. She didn't coddle him when he growled about being useless. She handed him his cane and told him to stop feeling sorry for himself and walk to the porch. "You're a mean woman, Clara Sterling," he would grumble, sweat dripping down his face as he took agonizing steps across the rug. "I'm a pragmatic woman," she'd retort, standing ready to catch him if he fell. "And you have a bridge to build, remember? Can't build a bridge from a bed." Through the pain, a bond was forged. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a partnership. They spent evenings on the porch, Caleb in his wheelchair, Clara sitting on the railing. They talked. Real talks this time, two-way conversations. He told her about his plans for the ranch, his theories on irrigation. She told him about the mill, and together they drafted plans to modernize the O'Malley operation using sterling capital. They were falling in love. It was slow, quiet, and sturdy, like the timber beams Caleb admired. He loved her wit. She loved his hidden gentleness. Then, 3 months after he woke up, a carriage arrived. It was a fancy rig, lacquered black with red wheels, pulled by 2 high-stepping bays. It looked entirely out of place on the dusty ranch road. Clara was in the garden, wearing a soil-stained apron, her hair tied back in a loose kerchief. Caleb was on the porch, whittling a piece of cedar. The carriage door opened and a woman stepped out. She was wearing a traveling suit of sapphire blue silk, with a matching hat adorned with ostrich feathers. She was stunning, polished, and radiated the kind of confidence that comes from city living. It was Isabella Vance. Clara felt her stomach drop to her boots. She looked at Caleb. His knife had stopped moving. His face had gone pale. "Caleb!" Isabella cried out, rushing up the stairs, ignoring the dust that coated the hem of her expensive dress. "Oh, my poor darling. I came as soon as I heard." She threw her arms around his neck. Caleb stiffened, his eyes wide. He looked over Isabella's shoulder, locking eyes with Clara. "Isabella," Caleb said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" She pulled back, framing his face with her gloved hands, tears shimmering in her eyes, though Clara couldn't tell if they were real or performed. "I heard about the accident, the coma." "Oh, Caleb, I was terrified. I realized I was wrong to leave. I realized I never stopped loving you." Clara stood frozen in the garden, clutching a basket of carrots. She felt small. She felt dirty and unrefined compared to this vision of elegance. Isabella finally turned, noticing Clara for the first time. Her eyes swept over Clara's apron and muddy boots. "Oh, you must be the help. Could you fetch my bags? And perhaps some tea?" The journey was dreadful. Caleb pushed Isabella's hands away gently but firmly. "Isabella, this is not the help." He reached out a hand toward the garden. "This is Clara, my wife." The silence that followed was louder than a gunshot. Isabella blinked, her mouth opening slightly. "Wife? But I heard rumors of a contract, a fake marriage to save the estate. Surely you don't mean—" "She is my wife," Caleb repeated, his jaw set. Isabella recovered quickly. She let out a tinkling, condescending laugh. "Oh, I see. The business arrangement. Well, surely now that you are awake, we can sort out the legalities. I'm here now, Caleb. I'm here to take care of you properly." Clara felt tears prickling her eyes. She didn't wait to hear Caleb's response. She turned and ran toward the barn, her heart breaking with every step. She knew Caleb had cared for Isabella once. She had read the letters. How could a simple girl from a failed sawmill compete with the great love of his past? The next week was a nightmare of polite tension. Isabella didn't leave. She stayed at the hotel in town but spent every waking hour at the ranch. She brought gifts, imported cigars for Caleb, silk scarves for Beatrice. She reminisced constantly about the old days, bringing up memories Clara couldn't share. "Remember the opera in St. Louis, Caleb?" she would say over dinner. "Remember how we danced until dawn? You were so dashing in a tuxedo. You belong in a world like that, not here." She would glance at Clara, who was silently eating her stew, making it clear where she thought Clara belonged. Clara watched Caleb. He was polite to Isabella, but distant. Yet he didn't kick her out. Clara interpreted his hesitation as lingering love. She felt she was standing in the way of his true happiness. The marriage was a contract, after all. Beatrice had promised an honorable exit if he wanted it. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. Isabella had arranged a private dinner for her and Caleb at the finest steakhouse in the city, an hour's ride away. She arrived at the ranch to pick him up, looking like a queen. Clara was in the kitchen, kneading dough with a violence that startled the cook. Caleb walked in leaning on his cane. He was dressed in his Sunday best. "Clara," he said softly, "I'm going to dinner with Isabella." Clara didn't look up. "I know, have a lovely time." "I'm going so I can tell her." "You don't need to explain yourself to me." "Caleb," Clara interrupted, her voice shaking. "I know the deal. Beatrice told me. If you woke up and wanted out, we handle it honorably." She finally looked at him, flower on her cheek, eyes swimming with unshed tears. "She's beautiful, Caleb. She knows your world." "She's the one you wrote letters to." "Clara, stop." Caleb stepped closer. "No, you stop." Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "I can't do this. I can't watch you choose her slowly. It hurts too much. I'm just the girl who saved the ranch. I'm just the nurse." "I get it. You are not just the nurse," Caleb growled. "Then why are you going with her?" Clara whispered. Caleb hesitated. He wanted to say he was going to close that door firmly, to say goodbye properly. But his hesitation was all Clara saw. "Go," she said, turning her back. Caleb sighed, frustration radiating off him. "We will talk when I get back." "Wait up for me." He left. The sound of the carriage rolling away felt like the closing of a coffin lid. Clara didn't wait up. She went to her room and packed a small carpet bag. She took off the wedding ring, a simple gold band, and placed it on the pillow. Next to it, she left a note. "Caleb, you deserve to be with the one who holds your heart. I won't be the chain that binds you to a debt paid. Thank you for listening to my stories. Thank you for making me feel heard, if only for a little while. Be happy, Clara." She slipped out the back door into the gathering storm. She saddled her mare and rode toward her parents' mill, the rain hiding the tears that streamed down her face. At the restaurant, Isabella was in high spirits. She poured wine and touched Caleb's hand. "Now that we are alone, darling, we can plan. We can sell the ranch. We can move east. You can be an architect in New York. We can have the life we dreamed of." Caleb looked at her. He looked at her manicured hands, her flawless face. Then he thought of Clara. He thought of Clara's flower-dusted cheek. He thought of her reading poetry in the quiet dark. He thought of her fierce defense of his bridge designs. "I don't dream of New York, Isabella," Caleb said quietly. "What?" "I dream of this valley," he said, standing up. "I dream of building bridges here. And I dream of a woman who knows the sound of the rain on my roof." "Caleb, sit down," Isabella hissed. "I can't," he said. "I'm at the wrong table. I'm with the wrong woman." He threw a pile of coins on the table. "Goodbye, Isabella. Don't come back to the ranch." He didn't wait for his carriage. He hired a horse from the livery stable and rode hard for home, ignoring the pain in his healing legs. A feeling of dread was coiling in his gut. When Caleb burst into the guest room and saw the ring on the pillow, his heart stopped. He read the note, his hands shaking with rage at his own stupidity. "You idiot," he muttered to himself. "You absolute fool." He ran back downstairs. "Beatrice!" he shouted. Where did she go? His mother appeared in her nightgown. "Who?" "Clara, she left." Beatrice's eyes widened. The mill. She would go to the mill. Caleb didn't wait. He ran out into the storm. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the roads to mud. His legs were screaming in protest, his muscles burning, but he didn't care. He vaulted onto his horse and kicked it into a gallop. The ride to the O'Malley mill usually took 40 minutes. Caleb made it in 20. He saw a light in the window of the small cabin near the river. He practically fell off his horse, stumbling in the mud, using his cane to keep upright as he hammered on the door. "Clara, open this door!" The door opened. Clara stood there, wrapped in a shawl, holding a lantern. Her eyes were swollen. Her father stood behind her with a shotgun, looking confused. "Caleb," Clara gasped. "What are you doing?" "You're hurt. You shouldn't be riding." "I don't care," Caleb panted, water dripping from his hat. He stepped inside, dripping mud on the floor. "You left." "I set you free," she argued, her voice cracking. "I gave you back to Isabella." "I don't want Isabella," Caleb roared. The sound filled the small cabin. He softened his voice, stepping closer, ignoring her father's shotgun. "Clara, Isabella fell in love with a memory. She fell in love with a man in a tuxedo. I'm not that man anymore." He dropped his cane and took her face in his wet hands. "I'm the man who lay in the dark for 5 months. And the only thing that kept me from drifting away was you, your voice, your heart." "But the letters," Clara whispered. "Burn them," Caleb said intensely. "I don't want the past. I want the woman who yelled at me to walk. I want the woman who builds bridges with me. I love you, Clara, not because of a contract, not because of a debt. I love you." Clara searched his eyes. She saw the rain, the exhaustion, and the raw, undeniable truth burning there. "You rode all this way in the rain?" she asked, a small smile breaking through her tears. "With your bad leg?" "I'd ride to the ends of the earth," he whispered. "Please, come home." Clara dropped the lantern and threw her arms around him. Caleb buried his face in her neck, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a spinning world. 6 months later, the valley saw a wedding that folks would talk about for decades. It wasn't in a sick room. It was in the meadow behind the newly repaired O'Malley mill. The fiddle music was loud. The barbecue was smoking, and the sun was shining bright on the mountains. Caleb stood at the altar, standing tall without his cane, watching. Clara walked down the aisle. She wasn't wearing her mother's old dress this time. She wore a new gown, lace imported from San Francisco, but she wore her muddy boots underneath just in case. When the preacher asked for the vows, Caleb didn't wait for the prompt. "I, Caleb, take you, Clara, to be my partner, my best friend, and my voice," he said, his voice ringing clear across the valley. "And I, Clara," she replied, beaming, "take you, Caleb, to be my heart and my home." And when they kissed, the crowd cheered. But to Clara and Caleb, the noise faded away. It was just like that first time in the quiet clinic, electric, certain and full of promise. A year later, the Sterling O'Malley Bridge was finished, connecting the valley towns. And if you looked closely at the cornerstone, you'd see an inscription carved into the granite, built by C&C Sterling. "Love is the strongest beam. They say love works in mysterious ways. Sometimes it takes a tragedy to bring two souls together. Sometimes you have to sleep through the darkness to wake up to a dream come true." Well, partners, that's the story of Clara and Caleb, a love that started with a whisper and ended with a shout. If that story tugged on your heartstrings, do me a huge favor, smash that like button and share this video with someone you love. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Frontier Rescue Stories. We've got a whole playlist of frontier tales waiting for you, right there on the screen. What did you think of Clara's choice to leave? Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments below. And tell me what kind of story you want to hear next. Maybe a gold rush mystery or a sheriff's standoff. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open. This is Frontier Rescue Stories signing off. Happy trails.